Enroll your child for the manifested e-learning platform and see their grades grow tremendously. These videos can be downloaded to a laptop for offline viewing or viewed from a smartphone in a cost-friendly format.
Welcome to Manifested e-learning. We are going to have a lesson in history and government. Your teacher, Conan Gakure. We are going to be introducing our first topic, which is European invasion. We're going to introduce our first topic, which is European invasion. European invasion of Africa. And the process of colonization. So that is the topic that you are going to be tackling. This is the topic that we are going to be tackling. The European invasion of Africa and the process of colonization. So these are new terms we have found. We have talked of European, we have spoken of invasion, we have spoken of Africa, and then there is the process of colonization. So as a matter of introduction, let us have a brief overview or a brief introduction before we discuss several issues relating to the European invasion of Africa and the process of colonization. So in your Form 1 work and the Form 2 work, you have been tackling different issues related or talking about history. In your Form 2 or in your Form 1 work, you discussed the traditional African societies. You talked of societies in Kenya. Can you be able to mention the societies that you discussed, their organization, their social, political, and economic organization? You talked of the Agikuyu, you mentioned the Luo, you mentioned the Nandi, all these, the Maasai, the Somali. These are native occupants of Kenya, for example. And then in your Form 2 work, you discussed the organization of African societies. Can you remember the African societies you discussed? Yes. You mentioned an example of the Baganda being one of them. You discussed how they were organized, right? You also talked of the Shona, right? Very good. You also talked of which was the other West African community that you discussed? Yes, very good. The Asante or the Ashanti, right? So these are native occupants of the continent of Africa. But at some point, the African continent was exposed, or there were visitors or people from other continents came to visit the continent of Africa. Some of them stayed here, while others starting different activities, that some of which you have already discussed. So let us discuss a few of them. In your Form 1 work, you discussed contacts, the topic on contacts between East Africa and the outside world. Can you remember the earliest visitors to the East African coast? Who are the earliest visitors to the East African coast? Yes, very good. So you talked of Arabs, very good. You talked of Syrians. You talked of the Greeks, very good. You also talked of which other communities? The Chinese, very good, right? Which other community did you talk of? You talked of the people from the Maldives Islands, right? Very good. All those were visitors. They were not natives of the African continent. They just came into the African continent. So they as they came, they had to go back to their continent or back to their motherland. These exposed the continent of Africa to other people. So towards the 18th, right? So those were just the earliest, the very earliest people. So, but in the 18th and 19th century, the African continent, right? Africa as a continent experienced more visitors into its into its borders. There were more people. So in the 18th and the 19th century, yeah, that is a point that you should note. In the 18th and the 19th century, Africa had more visitors. Africa had more visitors. So they came in large numbers, right? Most of whom now we are talking of the Europeans, that is apart from the Asian continent, because the earliest came from the east, the far east. Those were the earliest visitors, especially to the East African coast, right? So when we talk of now Africa as a whole, in the 18th and the 19th century, we experienced an influx of Europeans, that is the people who came from the from the continent of Europe, right? So those examples, can you mention the visitors, for example, to the East African coast who came from Europe, right? We had the Portuguese, right? The European, we had the Portuguese. These are Europeans, right? We also had the which other? We had the French. Very good. Which other? We had the British. The British coming to the coast, right? These were the earliest people to come to the African continent, the Europeans that came to the African continent. But now you ask yourself, what made them to come and occupy the African continent? They came to the African continent for what reasons? So briefly, let us look at the reasons for the coming of the Europeans. Remember, my dear learner, we are just laying a foundation for this topic so that we could understand when we talk of the European invasion of Africa, what does that mean? Or what is the process of colonization? So we are just laying out some groundwork so that you are able to connect the idea. So let us look at the reasons for the visitors. Reasons for the coming of the visitors. The basic one, or the most important one, that encouraged, especially now the Europeans, they came for the purposes of trade. They wanted to trade. That is the first reason. And then number two, for the purposes of exploration. Exploration. They wanted to expand their knowledge. They wanted to expand their knowledge. They wanted to get to places that they had not gotten from, right? The other one was to bring Western civilization. Western civilization. Western civilization. This was in terms of education. They wanted to bring their education. They came to start schools. They also came to start health centers, their medicine, so that they could treat the diseases, most of which were very common in Africa. And then lastly, or the other major reason for them to come to visit the African coast was to spread Christianity. Spread Christianity. Here we are talking of matters to do with religion and beliefs, right? So remember, the Africans, as we discussed in the social organization of the African communities, we had our own religion. We had our own belief system. But now the Europeans came and spread what we talk of Christianity. What we are talking today as the Christian faith was brought by the Europeans. So when these activities are happening, when these visitors are coming to the African coast, they discovered that Africa is very rich. Africa is able to get, or there are so many resources in Africa that really motivated them to want to get more and more share of the African continent. So as they came to the coast, the initial exploration or the initial movement of these visitors, the Europeans, was restricted to the coast. But the more they came to the African continent, they were interacting with people from the interior of Africa. And they discovered to the interior, or to the inside, or to the most interior places, there are resources. There were raw materials, there were minerals, right? There was very good environment that people could have, could settle in. So their desire to venture into the interior of Africa grew. So towards towards the middle of or towards the middle of the 19th century, most of them came down, or they were attracted to come and get portions of Africa. So that brings us to the beginning of our process. They came and had a process of invading or coming down to Africa. What we are referring to, the process of invasion and colonization. The process of invasion and colonization by the Europeans. My dear learner, I want you to note, I've said when they were coming initially, they were just coming to trade, explore, learn about the environment, and spread their own civilization through education and bringing medicine, right? And then to spread their religion. But the more they came, they discovered there are more resources inside the interior of Africa. These resulted to the process of invasion and colonization. So we ask ourselves, what is to invade and what is to colonize? So when you talk of invasion, it is the process, right? The process of acquiring a territory or a country or a nation, right? So when you talk of invading, so they went to the traditional societies who had their own way of doing things, and they invaded them. They wanted to possess that area because of the richness it had, because of the minerals, because of the good source of water that they had, and among very many other reasons that we are going to discuss as we go on. So that began the process of invasion. So as the Europeans came, they wanted to invade, right? They invaded the traditional societies and their organization. So apart from invading, right, they had to colonize. So we talk of colonization. So when we talk of colonization, it is the exercise of power, right? It is the exercise of power. It is the exercise of power. So in these areas or settlements that they came and invaded, remember, they are not just open. They are not just blank. There are Africans living in these areas. But now when the Europeans came, they decided to take control of these settlements. That is now what we are calling colonization. So the European powers, they have come from Europe all the way down, right, through the Atlantic Ocean, right? They have come to Africa. They have found Africans living in their own communities and in their own lands. But because of the richness of these lands, right, these powers invade this land, and now they start exercising power and control. Power and control over these areas. This is what we are now referring to as the colonization. So this process of invading and colonization, right? You come and discover this place, we could find a gold mine, right? We can mine gold here. You will want to exercise power as a European nation, right? So you have to control the natives because that is their land. You are now a foreigner. You have not been living there. You are just coming to exercise power on that portion or on that area, right? So this brings us now to the process of scramble and partitioning of Africa, because Africa, we have said, it is just a nation. The Africans are living on their own. They do not have conflicts. Maybe they have simple conflicts against each other. They are just having their own land, right? But now here comes the European. They have invaded their land, and now they are exercising control over those land. This led to the process of scrambling and partitioning of Africa. So let us look at the next thing that we are going to be discussing, the scramble. The scramble and partition of Africa. The scramble, actually here is the scramble for. There is a word for there. The scramble for and partition of Africa. So when these European powers, these were the earliest ones to come. We had the Portuguese. You remember you talked of Vasco da Gama, right? Yes, we had the French, we had the British. These were the earliest ones to come. So when they came and discovered the richness of the interior, right? So they wanted to exercise control. So they had to compete against one another. They competed against one another to get these areas, or these areas that are very rich, right? So the earliest, the earliest people or the earliest powers wanted to take the largest share of the area. So this led to the scramble for Africa and the partitioning of Africa. So when you talk of a scramble for, let us try and define what that is. The scramble. What is a scramble? Now, imagine you are having, you are just there at home, and then somebody offers, right, to give items for free. Let's say, for example, we are having food, right? People or somebody decides to give sugar to the people in your estate, right, for free. So you will see most people coming because you are not paying for this good. So you will want to get, at least you get, because there are so many of you, and maybe that person has not brought enough for all those people. So you will find people are fighting against one another to get that one item. That is what we are referring to as scramble. So when you talk of a scramble, it is a sudden rush. It is a rush for limited resources. Resource or resources. It can be one or many. So it is a rush for limited resources. So when you talk of scramble for Africa, it is when the European powers were scrambling or were fighting against one another to get a portion of Africa, because through their initial explorations and the work of those who came before them, they discovered that Africa is very rich, right? And it was a very good place. So each and every one of them wanted to get a portion. They wanted to get a part of Africa. So when you talk of scramble for Africa, let me write that. Scramble for Africa, right? It is the competition, right? It is the competition amongst European states. Amongst European states to get a portion of the African continent. To get a portion of the African continent. So these European powers, they joined, or they were fighting. They were trying to outsmart each other. They were trying to flex their muscle to see each and every one of them has gotten part of Africa. So that is what we are referring to as the scramble for Africa. It was the competition amongst the European states or European powers, right, to get a portion of the African continent. That is the scramble for Africa. So they had to fight. They had really to compete against each other, because every one of them wants to get this portion or this continent known as Africa. And there are so many of them. Apart from the British, they were joined by the others, the Italians. We had Spain, right? We had Germany that joined them. Yeah, we had Italy. We had Belgium. All of them came. They were fighting to get a portion of Africa, and we are going to look at that. And then, how did they get these? How did they get these areas? Right? They directly came. The governments could send representatives, right, to come and occupy these areas, or they could send or they could make agreements with the leaders in the African continent to secure these places. So that is about scramble. But now there is another term that we have introduced: partition of Africa. So what is to partition? Let us look at partition. Partition, right? When you talk of partition, it is the sharing. It is the sharing of materials. It is the sharing of material things or objects. It is the sharing of materials or objects in an organized manner. In an organized manner. So when you talk of scramble and partition, everybody is rushing to get the same thing at the same time. Survival for the fittest. If you have the might and if you have the brains, because now you have to work smart to make sure that you outsmart your competitor, right? That is a scramble. But at some point there was partitioning, right? Which we are saying it is a sharing of material things or objects in an organized manner. So when you talk of the partitioning of Africa, right? Let us explain that. The partitioning. The partitioning of Africa. This is the process where the process where the European powers shared the African continent amongst themselves. Right? So they shared out the continent of Africa amongst themselves in an organized manner. This happened in a conference. This happened in a conference that was held in Berlin, right? In the year from November 1884 to the February 1885. So these powers, the European powers, came together in a conference that was from November 1884 to February 1885. This was organized by the German Chancellor Bismarck, right, in the city of Berlin. So the African or the European powers came together on the table, right, and they had to share the continent of Africa amongst themselves. So let me just give you a brief illustration so that you could see how they tried to share the continent amongst themselves. So let me try and draw the continent of Africa, right? The continent of Africa and how they shared it amongst themselves. So just a brief, just a rough illustration of the continent of Africa. Yes, it looks something closer to that. Here we have the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal. Then we have the Horn of Africa. So that is just an illustration of the continent of Africa. So these European powers in this conference, the Berlin Conference, they shared out the continent of Africa amongst themselves, right? For example, the British were really interested in controlling the Suez Canal. So the British, you will find them, they are interested in the Suez Canal, right? And we are going to look at why they were interested with that. So you'll find they occupied this place together with parts of the East African coast. We have Kenya here, Britain, right? And then down here we had the Germans, right? And then majority of Western Africa, we had the French, right? Here we also have the French, that is in Morocco, the French. Then part of West Africa, we also have the British. And then in the Central Africa, we had the nation of Belgium. Yeah, here at the Congo, right? We had Congo. And then throughout the south, right? Britain, right? There was gold down there. There we had the British. Here we have the Italians, right? Italy, right? Yes, among many others. So you could go to your atlases. We have atlas. They will show you how they demarcated, right? They specifically demarcated the African continent. So as you can see, each and every one of them occupied a place, they occupied a place in the African continent. So these made them, right, to get colonies. Each country had a colony for themselves. So the portions they got, we refer to them as colonies. So my dear learners, as you have made that introduction, I've explained to you how the European came to Africa and how they eventually colonized the continent of Africa. We said it started just as a way of exploration, but as they were exploring and spreading Christianity, they discovered they are more rich, or there is more that they could do to the interior. So they came and scrambled. They were rushing, each and every one of them, to get a portion so that they could get the resources in Africa. And then they had to decide to subdivide, or share the continent, what we have referred to as partition, the partitioning of Africa. So, my dear learners, as we come to the very end of our introductory lesson on the European invasion of Africa and the process of colonization, I want you to attempt this question. Let me write here. The revision question. The revision question for you. Number 1, define the term. Scramble. Define the term scramble. And then number 2, give the meaning. The meaning of partition of Africa. Give the meaning of partition of Africa. Give the meaning of partitioning of Africa. Give the meaning of the term. Give the meaning of the term partition of Africa. The meaning of the term partition of Africa. So, my dear learners, once you are able to define those terms which we have discussed in detail in our first lesson. So, until our next lesson, it's bye-bye for now.
Thank you for choosing to study with us. For more information, you can call us on 0724 173845.